Cool. Well, we're here with Roxy Iverson. Thank you for taking time to be with Sarah and I at Harvest City Church. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. It was a journey coming over, wasn't it, from Portland?
Well, it always is, but it's always worth the journey.
Yes, yes. Well, we've known each other. Sarah and I have known you for roughly around 30 years. Can you believe that time has just gone like a flash?
Yeah, it really has.
And obviously, we'd have met you in Portland. Sarah and I went to Portland Bible College, nicknamed Portland Bridal College, but yes, for many reasons. And you went there. Tell us a bit about your journey to what brought you to Portland, PBC, stuff like that.
Well, I was raised on a farm in northern Idaho,
Right.
and very rural area. But in my teen years, actually some students from Portland Bible College came up to northern Idaho to work in the timber. They were falling trees. And while they were there, they started a Bible study that summer. And that's what introduced us to Portland Bible College.
Right.
So a couple years later, when I graduated high school, I decided to go to Bible college. It was a big step for me to leave the country and everything I knew and go into the big city.
Right.
But so that was like 1977.
Wow.
And I went to 2 years of Portland Bible College. And then after a series, I decided to stay in Portland because there wasn't really anything church-wise for me to go back to. And so I stayed in Portland and just got open door after door after door. And I was willing to walk through the doors that he opened. And here I am today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So were you brought up in a Christian home?
I was. My father met the Lord when he was 30. He got married at 31. He did not come. No one in his family was saved. Eventually, there were 7. 5 of them came to know the Lord in their adult years. But my dad started a whole new lineage.
Right.
And once he turned to the Lord, he was 100%.
Wow.
So growing up on a farm, it would have been a fun experience. I would have called it fun. I think you would have liked it too, Sarah, wouldn't you?
I think I'd like the idea of working on a farm. It's probably a lot of hard work.
Did you have horses and things like
We
that?
had horses, we had cows. But interestingly enough, I didn't work hard on the farm because I didn't even milk the cow because my dad didn't think that girls needed to milk the cow or get out and do heavy farm labor, believe it or not. So we were with him. We went out in the fields. We played. We did a lot of stuff. But I would drive truck, but never manual labor,
Right.
right
So
or wrong.
We know Debbie, your sister. Is there anybody else that we don't know?
There's a younger sister.
A younger sister.
She stayed in Idaho and has populated for all of us. 8 kids.
8 kids, wow.
I think
wow.
so. Yeah. So my life is full with
Right.
people.
And you get the opportunity to travel back and forth to Idaho still.
I do. Throughout the years, I always on long weekends, holiday weekends, I would go. My dad really expected us to come.
Right.
And then in the last few years, I've been able to go up more. And I have 8 nieces and nephews up there and a bunch of great nieces and nephews, and realized that they need me. They need my voice into their lives.
Right.
I have a voice that, it's different when their parents speak into their lives, even though they're adults. But an aunt can come and say things that mom and dad can't.
Yes, and aunt's cooking and ways are always better than the parents.
Yes, true.
That's what we've learned, haven't we?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yes. So what do you like to do for fun? I mean, I like fly fishing and fishing.
Right.
Things like that. What do you
Well, my hobby is gardening.
Oh.
And so I love everything about flowers and vegetables. Right. So from about March through October, my spare time is given to that. And in the wintertime, I mean, you can tell what season of the year it is by my credit card bill. If it's to Home Depot and to the lawn and garden centers, it means it's spring and summer
Right.
and fall. But if it's to the fabric and craft store, then you know it's wintertime.
Oh, fabric. So you do a bit of fabric.
I do quilting and sewing and just basically gifts for the grandkids and
Right.
nieces and nephews, things like that.
You know, like Sarah and I have been in ministry now. I hate the word ministry, but we've been serving the Lord. So that's probably a better word than saying ministry for a long time. But what would you say if someone was to ask you in an airport or a plane, you say you do ministry or you're going for ministry, what does ministry mean to you if someone was to ask you?
Well, I guess ministry means a lot of different things to
Right.
different people. So it kind of depends on who I'm talking to, how I explain what I'm
Yes,
doing.
that's true.
And I think we talked earlier when, make a trip like this and somebody says, well, have fun. It's not fun,
Yeah,
but it's rewarding
yeah,
and it's enjoyable.
yeah.
And so there's a lot of different aspects of what we call ministry.
Right.
There's just the day-to-day putting one foot in front of the other. And then there's the rewards that we receive when we see people's lives changed. And we see people just like my dad who come to know the Lord and start a whole new lineage. That's our reward, is when we see the lives of people changed.
How are you, with all the countries that you've traveled to, how do you manage to kind of keep connected? And
Well,
is it an active thing or
Yeah.
as and when, I guess?
I guess the beautiful thing now is that we have so many avenues of communication.
Sure. Yeah.
Back in the day, when I first started working at our church, the only way we communicated was through letters. We didn't even make phone calls internationally unless it was an emergency because it was cost prohibitive. And now I can communicate all over the world with a simple text or messenger or whatever means we use. And so I do keep up with people because I'm able to send them a quick text, tell them I'm praying for them, know what's going on. So in many ways, that's been a huge blessing.
Right.
Out of all the countries that you've been to, which is your favorite?
Don't say Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. And honestly, it's not my favorite country. It's the people.
People, right.
Sure.
Probably the hardest place I went to was Haiti,
Right.
but I loved the people.
Right.
I absolutely loved the people. So I think I don't do very much sightseeing or other things when I go to a country. And so it's not the place, it's the people.
Right.
And like on this trip, I'm going to Romania. It'll be probably my 12th or 13th visit there
Right.
because I have a deep connection there.
Yeah.
But I don't really have a favorite country.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I understand that. I have a favorite country. Should I tell everybody what it is? Most people would know in our church.
Let me guess.
Go ahead.
It's not Trinidad?
No. It's Japan.
Oh, okay,
Of
Japan.
course. I
Yes.
should know that.
Okay.
You should know Japan. I'm sure everybody knows Japan. I just like Japan for the people, for everything Japanese. I made that connection, Japan, with obviously PBC.
Okay.
Is what introduced me to Japanese friends and roommates. And funny enough, one of them, I ministered in his church, was it November? And we were both graduates of Portland Bible College. And to be able to preach in his church in November was a real privilege. First time I've been to his church. He was handed the church, and he came to PBC the same time as I did. And he's carrying the legacy. And I'm in Japan in a little town called Iga, and it looked like Kung Fu Panda. And in his office, there's Dick Iverson. There's you could see these certificates. And PBC's had a great impact across the world through the heart of Dick Iverson. And I think it's good to mention a little bit, to at least have it as, do you know how PBC came about? Do you want to share the story of how it started? What was the heart behind it from Brother Iverson?
Yeah,
Things like that.
it was back in the mid-'60s, and the church really, it had, he would say it had been, one person in the front door, one out the back door, and not really going anywhere. until they had a real sovereign move of God, and worship and prayer became the cornerstones of the church. And the church really began to grow. And then the young people, we had, before that time, they didn't have very many youth, but then the youth began to come. And one year, about 12 of the youth came into his office and said, we are ready to be trained for ministry, and our only option is to go, and they named 2 or 3 places.
Right.
But it's here where we've learned, and why don't you train us?
Right.
And so that was what got his mind thinking of his responsibility first to the young people of the house. So when they started Portland Bible College, it was predominantly for the young people of the house. But then, its reputation grew, and we, I think back in the mandate that the Lord gave Dick was that our church was to be like a fruitful bough whose vines go over the wall.
Yeah.
And that we had a well, and we were to, the vine was established, but we were to go over the wall. So that was his conviction. So, we sent ministry out. He traveled places, and all of that influence is what brought students to Portland Bible College. And I think that Sarah can attest to that.
Yes.
Yeah, because how did you come to PBC?
Gosh, it was where we used to have ministry teams. His Tapestry is what they were called back in the day. And they came to our small church through one link and another. They ministered to our church in South Wales. And it was a guy who was leading the team called Steve Carpenter.
Okay.
And I went on a trip one day. They went sightseeing or whatever. And he had a leaflet of Portland Bible College and handed it to me and said, I think you should apply here one day. And I think I was about 15 years old. And I kept that leaflet for 3 years before I applied. And yeah, it's amazing how the Lord sets us up for all these things. And from a small town in Wales to end up at 18 leaving home and flying to Portland.
Flying across the
Yeah.
world to Portland, yeah. And then it would have been the same time. I would have left Trinidad because we were both freshmen. So we were both first-year students. And really what brought us together, other than the Lord Jesus and what he established, is the vision of Dick Iverson. And he meant a lot to all of us. His books still, I guess you would know more than ever, but his podcast is doing very well. We send it out to all our church leaders and elders. And his books has become almost like, in many ways, almost epistles for us today from Dick Iverson and how to build a secure church in that way. You've had the privilege of working with Brother Iverson and being in his life. Could you explain a little bit like how that unfolded and what it meant to you, seeing all the things take place in his life and through yours as well?
Yeah, I was his personal assistant for 15 years.
Right.
And at that time, I saw the church grow from about probably 1,000 people to 3,000 people. I saw, our staff change and grow. It was a real privilege to watch us build buildings and
Yes.
take on projects. I probably will share this again, but in the last years, especially during the pandemic and unrest that we had in our city, I had people come to me and say, oh, I sure wish that Pastor Iverson was here. And I wonder what he would say if he was here. And in my devotions one morning, I was reading about David, and it said, David served his generation,
Right.
and he fell asleep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Lord said to me, Dick Iverson served his generation. And he fell asleep. And, the Lord used him to take a rebellious Jesus people generation and bring discipline into their lives and make them the men and women that we highly respect today that are in our movement. People have no understanding when I tell them that of the sacrifice that he made. I wouldn't call it sacrifice, but I would call he had friends that actually left him when he ushered in praise and worship into the church, because they felt that he was extreme. Just the songs that the choruses we sing, the clapping, the free praise and worship, that was unheard of. And he had a conviction that was what we were to do. Yeah. And it's, we wouldn't even think today that someone, that people would look down on that, you know. He had pastor friends in the city that just told him, we can't fellowship with you anymore. He had a significant ministry, who, if I were to name him, everyone would know, who would not have him on his platform at that time. Now, later in time, yes.
Yes, okay.
So God used him. He used him to build the buildings that we have that have been able to house our schools, and, to a publishing ministry, and to establish Ministers Fellowship International. Really great things. He did what he was called to do, and he fell asleep.
Right.
And that tells me that if we're alive today, and we're ministering, that God has given us the tools for this generation.
Absolutely, yeah.
He would not have thrived right now.
Right.
He didn't have the tools to do the things that you need to do and we need to do today.
Sure.
But as long as we're alive and breathing, God has given us the tools for our generation.
Yes.
Now, I don't know that answered your question. It went off on what we call a rabbit trail, but be that as it may.
Yeah, but I think it's part of what I think we carry that legacy, Sarah and I, in that way, because there's a lot of impartation that happened. PBC for us was, how would you describe?
We learned so much. It was just like quite mind-blowing, especially when you come from a small church, a bit like yourself, of maybe 30, 40 people, and then you're exposed to this, thousands. And I think I remember my first service sitting there. I don't think I worshipped, if I'm honest. I was just in awe of what God was doing. And it was infectious. And that what was taught and the messages. I still have some of my little notebooks that I've kept from messages from years gone by, and how it's really impacted our life, so much so that what we're building here today is part of that legacy.
Yeah, it's true, because in many ways how Sarah and I build church is how we've been taught through PBC and through Dick Iverson. There's no mistake. There'll be things. Her dad, she's a PK, I'm a PK,
right?
But to be honest, I didn't want anything to do. I wanted to be a professional fly fisherman, as you know. Which I found out Darlene Check is a fly fisher woman. So that's my claim to fame. But I didn't want to do any of that. And it was the Lord's dealing that called me into this work. And I thought, like Dick Iverson said in his message, once whatever the Lord is doing, find out what God is doing and do it with him. That was one of his words. And I think if I look at a church, even till now with all the modern tech and the cool gadgets and stuff, I think for me personally, a hallmark church would have been Bible Temple as I remembered it, with the orchestra in the front and the harp and the violins and the big piano playing and the choir. Today you don't see that. You see 5 people spread out, but that's different. But to me, it had such an impact of this is the majesty of God. And worship was really brought into the aspect of like the tabernacle of David and the tabernacle of Moses. And when we went to PBC and listening to Lanny Hubbard talk about the covenants, you remember the covenants classes that just blew our minds. And today, now pastoring on, believe it or not, we've been pastoring for how long, Sarah?
22 years.
22 years. Today, we're trying to impact the generation we've raised up in our city to carry that legacy, not just because of what we've learned, but for the Lord, for His kingdom.
Yeah, that's right.
because our society, like we were speaking, is in desperate need of Jesus. And more we see in the total depravity of man around us, in the airports, in the doctors, wherever we go, and they need Jesus. And I really believe Dick Iverson's message is how you change society is put a strong church in that city or that town, and you'll slowly change the world. And I really believe that's what we're doing. So around us, you would see things like books we've written
Right.
and things. These came out of us, but really, where do we get the inspiration? From Dick Iverson. I wouldn't consider myself a theologian, although I'm a graduate of Portland Bible College, and Sarah's a graduate as well in worship. But we do it because we had someone who showed us that if you have God on your side, all things are possible.
Right. You know, he was a firm believer in writing in books, because he said books, men come and go, but the message, when it's written down, will stay. And there are still Bible colleges that use his books as textbooks. And, you know, we had them all republished. We put new covers on them and had them updated. But he, even though he wasn't highly educated, he was wise enough to have men around him that helped him get the message out into those books. And they really covered the world. The other thing is that back in the day, before podcasts and before any kind of social media, you know, we had the cassette tapes.
Yes.
That was a huge ministry of our church. And it was something, going back, it was a vine that went over the wall. So we are hard-pressed to go anywhere in the world, but that we don't connect with someone who heard the tapes, heard the message. And that was, he used whatever means was possible in his day to get the word out. So if it was cassette tapes, certainly it's a lot easier to do a podcast now. But the message got out. And, you know, we honor a man, but really we honor someone who heard the Lord and in humility did what God asked him to do. And he made a huge difference.
Yes, massive. Not only in Portland, but across the world.
Right.
I just think of it like he met my father, and I think you sent me a picture of him and my dad together in the younger days in Trinidad. But he'd have met him in 1976. I would have been 4 years old at that time. And they still continued the relationship all the way through those years. Many people meet and start, very few walk together to the end. And I think that's a testimony to Dick Iverson and my father, that generation that kept relationships. And Sarah and I have been pastor, and we see people come and go, as any churches do, and people fall out and things like that. But very few stay the journey. And I think there's something to say about longevity.
I think, you know, when we have an attitude of what can they do for me, it's totally wrong attitude. He had people that he was loyal to that could do nothing for him. Perhaps they'd been friends in the early days, and he grew and they didn't. Not just numerically, but in many ways. Excuse me. But he was loyal to them to the very end. He had people in his church, in the church. When they initially started the church, or not started, but bought the first building, 3 couples put up their homes for collateral. To be able to get a bank loan for that house. And one of those couples would have been Alex and Esther. And in their older years, he made sure they had a home up on our 33 acres, and that's why they were there, is because he said they sacrificed in the early days. And, you know, nobody really knew who Alex and Esther were. They weren't ministry. They were good, solid members of the church who sacrificed, and he was loyal.
You remember them, Sarah?
I do, yes, yeah.
I think there's something, you know, endurance today. Pastor Iverson, if I remember right, he came out of T.L. Osborne in the tent ministry. My dad knew T.L. Osborne as well because he came to Trinidad and my dad saw somebody healed, which in the village, everybody knew this guy was
Right.
paralyzed because villages in Trinidad then, as it is now, very small and local, so everyone knew everyone. So when this guy was healed, he was genuinely healed.
Sure.
It wasn't made up,
Yeah.
So that connection happened there. And I think out of that ministry and something that the Lord touched my heart with this week, coming back from El Paso, Sarah and I were there, is we're in a world today where everything is instant. And I think you touched on it with messengers and technology. And even as we read the Bible and we talk about ministry, people who are blind, they see, people who are deaf, they talk. And especially for people who are sick in body, it was really on my heart this week. I've been praying for somebody in our church who is not well. And sometimes we long to see instant healing, but sometimes healings are not always instant. And the Lord led me to the scripture where Paul said, he that endure to the end will be saved. And there's much to say about endurance.
Right.
You may not get your healing, but just because you stand in there and you believe in and you make it to church and you worship and you lift your hands in your hospital room and you praise God, that may not be the instant healing to walk out, but God's battling for you. And I think with everything being instant, we just got to remember that in God, his timings are different and his ways are different. And for me, looking back at PBC, I'd have never thought I'd have been a pastor in a million years. I know
Wow.
Sarah could tell you the story.
I did think I was safe marrying him because I did not want to marry a pastor.
I think if they had a voting system in PBC, I'd probably been the least likely to be a pastor, but
Maybe.
but that's how the Lord calls us, I guess I'll always be nervous now. If somebody says, I want to be a pastor, I'd be like, you should never want to. You should be called to it, into ministry. And then God gives you a love for the people.
Right.
And then you could never be good at anything else because this is where God has put you back into.
I think Dick used to say when a young man would come to him and say, I feel called to be a pastor and can you open doors for me? He would say, go and teach the 5th grade boys
Yeah.
for the next 2 years and then come back and report to me.
How old is 5th grade for the English people?
About 10.
10-year-old.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, that would be a good ministry right
Yeah.
there. I'm telling you now.
Wow.
Yeah. So, ministry for us is what we do, and it's part of our church and our life. If you were talking to, well, you are talking to a pastor, but you're talking to pastors, what would you say are the non-negotiables when it comes to how we do ministry? What are some of the things that should remain?
Well, I think the Bible is our guidebook.
Right.
And, if the word says thou shalt not, it means thou shalt not.
Right.
It's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
I think also the fear of God
Right.
is a huge thing in our lives. Not that we're afraid of God, but that we have an awesome respect and honor toward God, realizing that if he says he will do it, he will do it.
Right.
If he says if you cover your sins, you will not prosper. That's what it means.
Right.
So we take God seriously. This is not a game we're playing.
Right.
There's eternity at stake for us and for those that we influence. And so we have to be mindful of the way we live because, as the Bible says, follow me as I follow Christ. Do we live that way? It's a pretty heavy assignment that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we saw, Sarah's just come off of doing some music training with someone recently. And I think looking at it as a pastor, worship is something that's so critical to the church. And I could tell a lot about a church by how they worship.
Right.
If it's the first time I'm visiting, as I walk into that auditorium on a Sunday morning, I could tell pretty much within 10 minutes where we're at by how the people worship, whether they just stand and stare at the screen or they worship the Lord. And, Sarah's written songs and she leads our worship team here. And it's kind of frightening what we see today, that we can sing songs that are so inward looking that we we no longer reflect the glory of God, but we come always every week. And one of the things we've talked about is the importance of praise in worship. And I think when I think of Bible Temple, and that's the name I remember.
Sure.
I know there are different names over
Right.
the years, but praise was powerful. You know, we enter his gates with thanksgiving and we enter his courts with praise. And I think Sarah could probably elaborate a little bit more, but I think the church is sort of losing an aspect of praise where there's a lot of movements where they just come straight into worship. We're slowly cutting off the praise songs, and maybe we do one or half of one, and then we go straight into worship. And how would you, I mean, you both can talk about it, but how would you think, how important is praise in a church? Not just praise and worship, but praise itself.
Well, I don't know. It's very important. It leads into worship.
Right.
Okay, so it's the door that opens into
Yes,
worship.
Yes.
I think having an attitude of gratitude
Yes.
in our daily lives prepares us to come into the house of the Lord and praise
Yeah.
and worship. But it doesn't just come, it's taught.
Right. Yeah.
And I used to teach the fifth grade,
Yes.
grade 7 or ages 9 and 10. We taught them how to worship. And we would say, okay, we're going to sing, and then we're going to take time, and we're going to say in our own words, you know. And we would actually practice. We would say, okay, what are we going to say when we have time to do it in our own words? And we would go around the room, you know, and we were teaching them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think, you know, methods change, but I'm happy to see that in a lot of churches that I'm in now, we've gone away from the inward focus and more of an outward focus toward the Lord. When we just sing about poor me and what a state I am, you know, it gives nothing to worship to, you know. And I think our worship leaders became uncomfortable with the pause. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But there is also a flow in worship, and you can speak to that more than I. But we start off with praise, and we are. I was in a church recently where there wasn't a song that could be clapped to, and I was just like, oh, you know,
Feels weird.
Yeah, it does. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like that's half the service.
Yes.
Or when people say, but I didn't really like the worship today. And I'm like, did you not like your worship?
Right.
Or what is worship to you?
Yeah.
Sure. I think people forget sometimes that the worship isn't about what they feel. It's about who we're worshiping
Yes.
to. That's it.
And I think you do this on a Sunday. Sarah does this, is where sometimes people come with heavy hands and heavy hearts.
Right.
And the only way to get out of it is by clapping and lifting of
Yeah.
hands. And that's when the chains come off and we begin to worship God. And I'm talking about worship for a reason, because out of Bible Temple, PBC, you had like Ernest Gentile and Tim Smith and guys who brought worship to the level where people have springboarded to today. But I think we cannot leave the main fact that we ought to worship God and praise Him in a way that brings freedom in people's lives.
Right.
We had a service a few years ago, and during the service, Sarah felt led to do an appeal. Do you remember this? During the worship after praise? And people gave their hearts to the Lord. The word hadn't been preached then. We don't do this all the time. It only happened once. But such was the power of God's presence that it changes. And I'm saying this because there's a generation today that are looking for techniques and ideas, and they're on Instagram and Facebook and looking for what church does what, how do you do this? And it's going back to the basics of praise God, worship Him. That old song, Jack Hayford song, you know, Majesty, worship His Majesty.
Right.
He has all the answers for what we need to. And sometimes tapping back into Him and His way is the only way of doing it.
You know, what would you do if one Sunday there was no electricity
Right.
in the house? Would your worship team still be able to have worship?
I would hope so.
That's a good barometer.
I would hope so.
That's it.
I think if we need technology to worship, we've lost the heart of worship.
Right.
Yeah.
I think technology aids us in worship, but
Exactly.
not the main means
Right.
to worship.
Yeah.
For all the seasons that you've gone through in life, is there like a specific song that you kind of cling to or that you find encouragement from?
Well, I was raised on the hymns, and every once in a while, a hymn will come to mind. I can't bring like a thought today, but there are some songs right now that have come out in the last few years that are really hymns.
Right, yeah.
Some
Yeah.
beautiful songs. And I guess the one that to me right now, I'm not sure that I know the name of it, but all I know is All My Life You Have Been Faithful.
Right.
All my life you have been so, so good.
Yeah.
And I rehearsed that. Since Dick's passing, it'll be 6 years. I have sustained myself by worship music.
Right.
I mean, like this morning in my hotel room, I had worship on, and there are songs that minister deep to my spirit, and it's made a difference for me on my weekday basis, let alone in church. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Sarah? What song is it?
Wow, I always reflect sometimes, depends what I'm going through,
Yeah.
but I oftentimes it'll be an old song that my mum would have taught me
Okay.
from way back from when I was little. And it's like, I mean, one of the things, even the other day when I was thinking about it, was when I was on janitorial at Portland Bible College, we had to, on a Monday, our job was to put the backpacks on,
And vacuum the auditorium.
But during that time, I would use that opportunity to create worship lists. And I wasn't a worship leader then, but I had it in my heart.
Yeah.
And I always remember singing things like, "What a mighty God we serve," all these golden oldies from way back when. And really, those are the songs that, if I'm going through a tough time, those are the ones I kind of go back to from when I was a lot younger.
I tell you a funny thing. You wouldn't believe what we found in the auditorium vacuuming.
Wow.
On a Monday. some weird and wonderful like envelopes with people forgot money in it.
Okay.
We always handed it in. At least I did. I'm not sure about Sarah. But I found a little vice where someone was tying flies for fishing. Obviously it wasn't me, but somebody else and things like that. And I'd say that for a reason because you could get distracted in worship or in the word. And I think it's the one time in our lives we can leave everything and focus on what really matters, which is what we'll be all doing in heaven, which is worshiping the Lord.
I think the most impacting songs are songs that you can sing in the car on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. When we have songs that we can't, we have to look at the words every Sunday because they're maybe a little complicated or a little wordy. And there's no way that we can remember them on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's kind of sad, isn't it?
Sure.
Because that's what you want to be singing.
Yeah.
So we need to be mindful of that too.
Yeah.
The musicians love the complicated, but in the midst of the complicated, it needs to be simple enough.
Simple enough, yeah.
Sure, to remember, yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the takeaway songs from last year's conference, we came back and we taught it in our church, was Build Your Church.
Okay.
Because for us at that moment, in that season, this is just last year, that was the thing the Lord sort of recentered me on, is now you've come to a place where I want you to build my church. And that's the song that we've taught. And so every time we sing it now, it pulls deep because it kind of reminds me of my mission now in these years is to build his church. And let him get the glory in that way, You've served with pastors, and you serve pastors all across the world. What advice would you give to people, other staff people might be watching this, about how serving your local church or serving your pastors in a local church setting?
Well, I just had the privilege of talking to your staff.
Yeah.
And I emphasized that we have a great privilege to serve the people of God and to be paid by the tithes of the people. and the fact that everything that we do has kingdom value as a staff and as a team. I also would say that unity
Right.
with the team is, I can't stress the importance of unity with the core team that's around the
Right.
pastor, because it starts there, and once discord comes in, there's never a good result.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the key elements I think the enemy uses to come against the church. Is, in our experience, it's never from outside. It's not
No.
the fear of all of this world has a lot of scary things. It can't really stand against the church. It's really what comes in from the inside
Right.
that affects. And I think all of us, to keep a pure and broken heart before the Lord, and to keep your fences short.
Right.
I have a saying here, and I think our church know it parrot fashion. Offense is a choice. Choose not to be offended.
Right.
And we could get offended at anything these days, but sometimes we have to choose to not be offended. And Sarah and I have served our own parents who are pastors, and we've served in other pastors' churches on staff or in their team. And there's always different styles and way of doing it. But one of the things we've learned when we were serving is it's not what we want, it's what the senior pastor lays the vision, and our goal was to help make that happen. Whether we liked it or not, it was our mission
Right.
in that way. And I think that's an important factor today. We all had an opinion, but at the end of the day, when we made a decision as a team, we ran with it together.
That's right. And they're individuals. They can't stand alone and do their own thing.
Yeah.
You're all together as a team, and that's where the enemy comes in. Is when one person stands alone and does their thing, then the enemy can come in and pick them off.
Yeah.
When you're all tied together, it's very, very difficult for him to get in and make an inroad.
Right. Yeah. What sort of difference have you seen coming from America, where the churches in Portland or the churches in the MFI that you see, that's different to like churches in Europe? Because the reason I ask you this is a lot of the vibe I get from the European churches and like within England, we are sort of, whether by choice or by will, we are sort of shown this is how you do it in America. This is the standard. So you look at the mega churches and the big auditoriums and the tech system, although we have good tech around us, but the standard there. But for somebody who lives in America and been around a lot of churches, what would you say is noticeable, good or bad, whatever way, of the churches between Europe and America?
Well, I can't really speak to that too much because the churches that I visit in Europe would be churches that are directly connected with us.
Right, okay.
And so they would have more of our DNA than others. I think we have the problem in the States too. We compare ourselves to others.
Right.
And we think that we see the outward things and we think that is what's going to make it grow. And each church is unique, each pastor's unique, each community is unique, and what works in one community is not going to work in the other. So I think we really have to have the mind of God as what He has for us and our individual church families.
Right, yeah. Well, for us working with MFI and coming out of PBC, it's kept us all building with the same goal in mind, which was to give Him the glory. And like at last year's conference, we saw I think it had a good impact on us, was the churches in Brazil. How many churches were being raised up, and the thousands upon thousands.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good to just see that, because for you, Sarah, that was a bit of an inspiration, right?
Yeah, it was. It was just amazing to see what God is doing throughout the world, and sometimes when you can be in one part of the world, you don't see the rest of it. And so for us, it was exposes us to a bigger platform of what God is doing. And it was exciting to hear all the testimonies of what the Lord is doing throughout all the churches.
Yes, and that's the importance of being connected with others.
Right.
Is because you realize that God is doing things all over the world.
Yes.
And unless you're connected, you don't
know.
know.
Yeah.
And you know, we can begin to, you know, our little problems and our stuff going on, and you should realize that, hey, you know, it goes both ways. There are people that are in tougher situations than you, and there's in better situations, and you begin to realize that you get a better perspective when you are around others.
Yeah.
So I know that you're going on to Ireland and Romania after this. So have you got any other plans for any other different countries that you're going to visit throughout the year?
No, not at this point. I sit with our church is called Manna House now,
Right.
and I'm on their global team, so I represent them some. Like last year, I went to Turkey and Romania, and I've gone to Liberia and Uganda, but right now I don't have actually any other countries that I'm planning to go to, and I'm okay with that. I always ask the Lord to open doors that should be open and close doors that should be closed. And I have had the privilege of traveling all over the world. And unless the Lord opens the door, I don't need to open one.
Sure.
I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Just go where you're called and serve
Right.
to your capacity in that way. You know, Manor House, as you mentioned,
Right.
used to be City Bible Church,
Right.
which used to be Bible Temple.
Right.
And so we would have been from Bible Temple to City Bible Church.
Okay.
From Brother Iverson to Pastor Frank.
Right.
Pastor Frank was our pastor for maybe
3-4 years.
3 or 4 years. And to see him this year again, last year was a blessing.
Yeah.
And what a great teacher. I guess no one, in my estimation, no one could teach quite like Pastor Frank teaches.
Right.
In that way. He taught us a lot in that way. And now this year, there's another transition, right?
Right.
So do you want to tell people what's happening this year? Has it happened?
It will officially happen in October. We're not changing the name.
Yeah.
But Pastor Mark Estes took the church from Pastor Frank.
Right, yes.
And he's done a magnificent job of walking through some hard things. Our city really shut down for a long season during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then we had a lot of unrest and just a lot of shaking going on in our city. And he had to walk through all of that season. He will be officially turning the church over to Pastor Daryl Corbin, Daryl and Michael, who you're familiar with because you went to school with them. And Pastor Mark is really an evangelist at heart, and God is going to opening doors for him. He definitely will still be, he will not be a stranger to us.
Sure.
But it's really. I really honor him because he really saw that Pastor Daryl had the giftings to lead the congregation, and they've made a smooth transfer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we both know them. We were both graduates together.
Yeah.
At the same time at PBC, and I guess looking back, I said to Darrell and even Simon Mull, who's the president. We know each other BC, which is before children, not just before COVID, before wife, before children. Yeah. And looking back then to now, who would have thought us guys, God would have put us in the places where we were. And it's not because we were noble or wise I think it's anybody listening to this, it's the power of just being faithful to the Lord.
Right.
And I know Brother Dick used to say that God will make room for you. He will make room for your ministry. You don't need to push yourself forward and do things. God, if there's a way, God will open the door for you.
I think you start by serving.
Yes.
And you guys started by driving who knows how far to help a small church do worship on a Sunday when you were in Portland.
Yes.
So, and who would have thought then that you would be over worship in a church? And so you start with the little things, and when you're faithful in the little opportunities that you're given, God gives you more. But people who want to just start out big probably are going to have some schooling to go through before they do that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to show you a picture before we close. I was trying to find it on my iPad. That's all I was playing with it. But I didn't know where I saved it, so I'm going to find it. Sarah could probably talk to you about something else while I look see if I can find it. That's your cue, Sarah, so I'll see if I find it.
So how far is this picture going back?
I don't want to give the secret away.
Okay.
I just got to find it.
Wow, I'm
So,
curious.
yeah, you find an interesting thing to talk to Roxy about, and I will... I think I'm almost there. Are you waiting for me?
Oh, yes, definitely.
okay.
We are.
So one of the things, I wish I could find it on my iPad, but you would see it, and maybe our tech guys can put it on. But one of the things I loved about Brother Dick is his ability to remain a dad and a grandpa at heart. And he used to always say, "You're my child," he used to hold me and say that, he used to say that to Sarah and I, "You're my children." And especially with my boys, when you guys came, used to buy them all the things we want, if we couldn't afford, buy them. Brother Dick would take you to John Lewis, do you remember?
I remember.
And buy Dylan and Brandon. Now they're
We still have the Playmobil stuff.
we still have the stuff that he bought. And but I showed my daughter this Trinity, because Trinity doesn't have too much memory of Pastor Dick like the boys do. But have a look at that picture.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that,
I do
Sarah?
remember
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. The guys will put it on the screen if you can't see it. But to me, that's the heart of a pastor, where, so I see it today where a lot of men serve, they come detached they become too big for them, for their own way, that they can't play with kids. And I think if you could remain that sort of heart, where you have a heart for the Lord, love the Lord's house, but to love his children is important. And I think I'll never forget one of the years you guys came, and of Pastor Iverson and yourself sitting on the floor in our house. Do you remember? On the carpet, having fish and chips with the boys, and just enjoying the evening together. And they still remember that, the boys do, especially Brandon.
Yeah.
Brandon is now 24, but he still remembers that. Yeah. And it's sometimes the impact of what we do is not what we preach or the songs we write, but it's how we live every day when we're not on the platform and when we're not preaching that Sunday, but it's when we with everybody, how we behave, how we conduct ourselves, shows our real heart in that way.
The most important thing you can do, one of the most important things you can do to help a pastor is to be interested in his family. And I have found that the Lord has given me, I guess it's a gift, that I can remember things. So I remember people's names. So, when I come here, I know that there's Brandon, Dylan, and Trinity. Right. And it means a lot to people when to a pastor, when I meet them at a conference and I say, "Now, how's your son doing? I know he had this, I know he had that,
sure.
And just to show an interest, because it means a lot that you're not just looking at them, but you're looking at their family too."
Yeah. And you're right. And there's nothing that could take that away. And I think it's the heart of Christ. He's into the crowds, but he also has the detail of that little child in their lives. And I think, the way I would wrap this up, Sarah and I, is just really to say thank you for all that you have done on behalf of Harvest City Church, Sarah and I, yourself, Brother Iverson, who's with the Lord, but also Portland Bible College, Manor House now. How much of a role it played to our lives being there. And I think partially a lot of what we did do here today is because of that heritage that we receive through Portland Bible College, through those years in that way. And even part of MFI as well. God has really blessed us.
And you know what? The story continues.
Yes.
Because you're leaving a heritage and a legacy for the next generation.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty cool, actually, how one seed grows into a big tree, and there's fruit everywhere, and we get to continue on.
Yeah.
Amen.
You want to say anything in closing?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope that wasn't too painful.
No, I hope it was okay.
Yes, it was fine.
Is that what you were wanting? Maybe.
Yes.
Yes.
No, I'm dying inside.
I'm done.
I'm looking at Sarah.
I can't wait to get this off.
See?